Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Spruce Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 16 NFL Power Rankings. So, going over last week's rankings and what those teams did in Week 15. Last week at number 10, I had the Chargers. They were destroyed by the Buccaneers, losing 40-17. Ninth was the Broncos. They beat the Colts 31-13. Eighth, I had the Ravens. They dominated the Giants 35-14. Seventh was the Packers. They easily beat the Seahawks 30-13. Number 6 was the Steelers. They lost the Eagles 27-13. Fifth was the Vikings. They destroyed the Bears 30-12. 4, I had the Bills. They beat the Lions 48-42. Third was the Eagles. They beat the Steelers 27-13. Number 2, I had the Chiefs. They defeated the Browns 21-7. And 1 was the Lions. They lost to the Bills 48-42. Getting into this week's rankings, beginning things at number 10, I've got the Texans. So the Texans enter my rankings at number 10 after they beat the Dolphins 20-12. Texans defense played a great game, allowing just 12 points and 3.6 yards per play, plus they forced 4 turnovers. Then offensively for the Texans, they were okay. They didn't play their best game, as they scored 20 points, although they averaged under 4 yards per play. But TJ Stroud threw for 2 touchdowns, both of which went to Nico Collins, and the Texans, after a 20-12 win over the Dolphins, and the Colts lost to the Broncos, Texans, they've actually clinched the AFC South, and I've got the Texans at number 10. Coming in at number 9, I have the Broncos. So the Broncos enter at number 9 after a 31-13 win over the Colts, and despite this final score, this was actually a pretty close game. The Broncos used a big 21-point fourth quarter to get the win, but outside of that, they didn't play their best game. Bo Nix didn't have his best game, throwing for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns, but also threw 3 interceptions, and the Broncos also didn't run the ball effectively, averaging just 2.7 yards per carry. Now, defensively, the Broncos, they were great. They held the Colts to just 13 points, they did not allow a single point in the second half, and they forced 5 turnovers, returning 1 of them for a touchdown. But despite the Broncos not playing their best game, they were still able to get the win, and this win here puts the Broncos in a really good spot to make the playoffs, and if they make the postseason, it'll be the first time they make the playoffs since they won the Super Bowl back in 2016. But I've got the Broncos at number 9. Number 8 is the Ravens. So the Ravens, they remained at number 8 after an easy 35-14 win over the Giants. The Ravens offense played a great game. Lamar Jackson threw for 290 yards and 5 touchdowns, and the Ravens also ran the ball very effectively, rushing for 170 yards on 5.5 yards a carry. And receiver Rashad Bateman also played a good game with 3 catches for 80 yards and 2 scores. Then the Ravens defense looked pretty good, although they were playing against the Giants, but they allowed just 14 points, held them to 236 total yards, and forced a turnover. But the Ravens, after an easy win over the Giants, they remain at number 8. Coming in at number 7, I have the Steelers. So the Steelers, they enter at number 7 after they fell to the Eagles 27-13, and this was a really weird game for the Steelers. They were down 17-13 at the half, thinking they were in a decent position to come back and win the game, but the Steelers had just 2 drives in the second half, and they had just 6 minutes of possession in the second half. And the Steelers, they punted the ball away with a little over 10 minutes left, but they wouldn't get the ball back. The Steelers' offense didn't play their best game, scoring just 13 points, although to be fair, they hardly had the ball. But Russell Wilson wasn't great with just 128 yards and a touchdown, and the Steelers also didn't run the ball well, rushing for just 56 yards. Then defensively for the Steelers, they weren't great but weren't terrible, but the problem for the Steelers was they couldn't get off the field, as they allowed the Eagles to convert 10 of 17 third downs. But the Steelers, after a loss to the Eagles, they're still 10-4, and they lead the AFC North by a game, and I've got the Steelers at number 7. Coming in at number 6, I have the Packers. The Packers, they enter at number 6 after a dominant 30-13 win over the Seahawks. And the Packers, they played a great all-around game. Offensively, they scored 30 points, and they have now scored at least 30 points in 4 straight games. Jordan Love played well once again, with 229 yards and 2 touchdowns, and this was his 4th straight game without a turnover. And the Packers, they also ran the ball well, rushing for 140 yards and a touchdown. Then defensively, the Packers, they dominated. They held the Seahawks to just 13 points and just 208 total yards. They also forced 2 turnovers and got 7 sacks. But this was a great game for the Packers, convincingly beating another team that's likely to make the playoffs. And the Packers, after a good win over the Seahawks, they're at number 6. Getting into the top 5, at number 5, I have the Vikings. So the Vikings enter at number 5 after they destroyed the Bears 30-12 on Monday Night Football. And the Vikings, they played a good game. Offensively, Sam Darnold threw for 231 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, and Justin Jefferson had a solid game with 7 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side of the ball, the Vikings, they were great. They held the Bears to just 12 points and under 300 yards, and this was a good all-around performance for the Vikings, and after a dominant win, I have them at number 5. Coming in at number 4, I have the Chiefs. The Chiefs enter at number 4 after a 21-7 win over the Browns. And this was another game that could have been better for the Chiefs, but it was still a decent win. The Chiefs, they were in control of this game the entire way. They scored early in the game and never looked back. Although, this wasn't their best game, especially offensively. They averaged just 4.1 yards per play and scored 21 points, but the defense dominated for the Chiefs. They did not allow a single Browns point until garbage time. They also got 5 sacks and forced 6 turnovers. Now, the big thing for the Chiefs this week is Patrick Mahomes left the game with an ankle injury, as he got hurt midway through the 4th quarter and didn't return to the game. Now, Mahomes is believed to have suffered a mild high ankle sprain, although he is considered week to week. But the Chiefs, after a win over the Browns, I have them at number 4. Third, I have the Lions. So the Lions, they fall to number 3 after they lost the Bills 48-42. The Lions, they had their 11-game winning streaks now. Offensively for the Lions, they were good. They put up 42 points. Jared Goff threw for 494 yards and 5 touchdowns. And receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown also had a huge game with 14 catches for 193 yards and a score. Now, the problem for the Lions was their injury-riddled defense, as they have a ton of injuries on the defensive side of the ball, and they had no answer for the Bills' offense. They allowed 48 points and 559 yards of offense. And speaking of injuries for the Lions, they got even more banged up this week against the Bills. As running back David Montgomery tore his MCL, defensive tackle Willie McNeil tore his ACL, Carlton Davis fractured his jaw, and Khalil Dorsey fractured his leg. But the injuries, they continue to pile up for the Lions, and they now have 22 players on IR. And the Lions, they lost for the first time since week 2, and because of that, I have them falling to number 3. Coming in at number 2, I have the Bills. So the Bills, they jump a couple of spots to number 2 after a 48-42 win over the Lions. The Bills' offense was great, as they had 48 points, and have now scored at least 40 points in back-to-back games. And Josh Allen was great once again, with 362 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also adding 68 yards and another 2 scores on the ground. And the Bills as a team, they ran the ball extremely effectively, rushing for 197 yards and 4 touchdowns on 5.8 yards per carry. Then the Bills' defense wasn't great, allowing at least 40 points for the second straight week, and this was another week where they were torched through the air, as they allowed over 300 passing yards last week. They allowed nearly 500 passing yards this week. But this was a good performance for the Bills, able to beat the Lions, who are one of the best teams in the NFL. And a fun fact about the Bills, they're just the second NFL team ever to score 40 points and to allow 40 points in back-to-back games. But the Bills, they've been playing well, especially offensively, and I have them at number 2. And coming in at number 1, I have the Eagles. So the Eagles, they move up to number 1 in my power rankings for the first time this season, after they beat the Steelers 27-13. And this was a good win for the Eagles. Their offense scored 27 points, although they didn't run the ball that effectively, averaging just 3.1 yards per carry, but they answered the questions about their passing game. Jalen Hurts threw for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns, and receivers A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both hit over 100 yards and a touchdown. Then defensively, the Eagles were good, allowing 13 points and pitching a second-half shutout, and they held the Steelers to just 163 total yards. And to end this game, the Eagles really played ball control football, as they ended the game on a 21-play, 88-yard drive that took the final 10.5 minutes off the clock. And the Eagles, they had the ball for 24 of the 30 minutes in the second half, and they had the ball for 40 minutes throughout the course of the game. But this was a good game for the Eagles. It wasn't necessarily the most entertaining game, but it was a good win for the Eagles. They beat another good team as they beat the Steelers. They answered questions about their passing game, and they moved to number 1 in my power rankings. Well, those are my Week 16 NFL Power Rankings. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.